Hello, welcome to Temple Talk. Before we begin, I need to mention a few things. Firstly, I am not an official representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, nor am I sponsored by them. I'm doing this on my own time and on my own dime. Secondly, every resource I use to create each episode are all publicly available material approved by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I will always include links in each episode description. Lastly, if you'd like to learn more about our beliefs regarding the temple and all things, I will also include a link to the website churchofjesuschrist.org in the episode description. Thanks for tuning in, and now for the episode. Hello, welcome to Temple Talk. My name is Camille. I will be your Temple Talker. I have a very special guest Temple Talker today, Samantha. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am from Houston, Texas, and
Woo!
I serve my mission in Nauvoo in the historic sites where the second temple was built. And so I love learning about the temple and talking about it. It's something I don't get to talk as much about since I've come home from my mission. So that is why I get to be here today, and I'm really excited.
I'm so excited. We were really lucky since you were serving during COVID, right?
Yeah,
When
I
you were on your
was.
mission. So we got some chances to see some of the virtual tours that were provided that you and your companion did, and it was awesome. So Samantha's so awesome. She's good. This is going to be great. You're all in for a treat. We're going to go ahead and get started. The title of this episode, Ordinance Night of the Living Dead, what does proxy work mean? I remember a moment when I was in high school and I was mentioning to my friend, hey, we're going to go do baptisms for the dead, my temple group. And that's very normal language in the church. And she gave me the weirdest look. And I was like, what? And she said, you're baptizing dead people? She's like, are you like unburying them and baptizing them? And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. She was really panicked for a second. And I was like, by proxy work, this is very different. But I think that was her first impression of the temple was pure terror. And that would be horrifying if that were the case. But thank heavens we don't have to dig up any corpses and baptize them like she thought. So hopefully her opinion has approved of the church since then. Good missionary opportunity right there. I blew it. But yeah, I think this is going to be great because you served on so many historical sites to be able to talk about the sacrifices that the early saints of the church made to make temple worship a priority. In a previous season, I talked a lot about temples in the Bible and how God always commanded a temple to be on the earth so they could perform ordinances in the temple and why that was so sacred. And it's still just as important today that we serve in temples, that we worship, that we have sacred places set apart and dedicated through the priesthood authority to be able to perform ordinances, not just for ourselves, but for those who have passed on. It's a really neat opportunity. So really excited to get into this. Would you, Samantha, be willing to set the picture, set the tone of what it was like to be an early saint?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I think is really cool is to kind of just see where they were coming from, right? When we talk about the restoration of the church, it's really cool to put it in that context of the focus of people in that time
Mhm.
period, right? There was this huge, I'm trying to think of the right word, like not uprising, but movement. There we go.
Mhm.
This huge movement, right, where people were so focused on God, and that was like the center of kind of what their focus was on and their social lives and everything that they were doing, right? I feel like it's so cool to think about how that was kind of the center of a lot of their societies. And
Mhm.
so coming into the church, then they're able to have this restored knowledge, right? And this greater knowledge and these ways of being able to come closer to God that were very unique for that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, the thing that amazes me is how the early saints didn't have a handbook. They didn't have all these instructions of piece by piece. They were learning it as it was being revealed. And so they were doing their best. They lived in an exciting time of revelation, of trying to get things done in order and correctness. It was a really exciting time, and I'm just amazed at the faith of them that were willing to be flexible, I guess I would say. Whereas now we have, oh, what's the answer to this question? There it is. It's in the
Yeah.
handbook. It's just, oh, the faith of the saints is amazing. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, I love that. It makes me think of how now or when President Nelson was first called, right? Every general conference
Mm,
was like, "Oh, what's gonna happen now?" Probably it was like
mhm.
that every single day for them. It's like, "Okay, what's the
I didn't
next
even
step
think
in,
about
like,
that.
establishing Zion?" It's we were excited about, like, honestly, little announcements probably in comparison to what they were experiencing. It was such an exciting time to be part of the church. It still is, but
Absolutely. No, I love that. That's a great comparison.
yeah. So I don't know, I kind of like to think about that and how they really did, like you said, they had a lot of faith and they were searching, I feel like, so diligently. Just like you said, they didn't have, like, the resources we have now where we can just go and look in all of the scriptures or all of these books and things that have been written since then, right? They really were just going off of kind of what they had at the time, and they were searching for that light from God.
Absolutely. Thinking ahead a little bit, I think President Nelson has exemplified this so well. And we've gotten it more, I think, than we've gotten, not necessarily with some of the other prophets, but I think more openly than we have with some of the other prophets about
Yeah,
how in the history of this church, it started with a question. It started with Joseph Smith having a question and asking the Lord. And he wasn't expecting you're going to be the tool in which I build the restored church on the earth. He was a 14-year
mhm,
old kid, but very much that all of these things that we're about to talk about have been revealed line upon line as questions have been asked. And I think President Nelson has been asking very much questions that we've just kind of taken for granted of, oh, this is the way it's
yeah,
always been done. Therefore, this is what we do. And especially with a lot of relating to the temple, a lot of practices that were not necessarily doctrine that he asked about and then received a better way to do it. And so, very much all of the saints, their faith and their questions is what made the incredible revelation so personal to them. These were answers that they had, the answers to questions they had. This wasn't just the Lord just giving them all little bits and pieces and watching them scramble around and try to do his will. This was very much, we want to do his will. What's next? Kind of a thing.
yeah. I love that, and I think if he'd given it to them all at once, they wouldn't have maybe understood it as
Oh,
well, and that's
it would
why
have
it
been
had to
impossible.
come a little bit at a time. That's something that I love is I've kind of learned about, like, how their lives were like, I guess, as they were building the temples, like, that building of the temple prepared them to be ready for the things that
Mm.
they would be able to experience there, and that's something that I think is really neat.
I love that. They're so involved in their preparation. Nowadays,
Mhm.
we work hard to try to prepare people to go to the temple because it's all available and all right
Yeah.
there. Whereas when they're building, they're engaged in every step of the way.
Yeah, something that is cool, so they had built a temple previously in Kirtland, and that's kind of where you hear really cool stories about, like, the women, like, crushing up their china or, like, the really
Mhm.
fine things and using them, to build that temple, and then as they were commanded to leave, I'm sure you can imagine, or really we can't imagine, right, what that must have felt like for them. They've just spent all this time and all this energy to build a temple, and they're not even, honestly, not even super sure why, right?
Mm-mm.
They know that it's going to be a place of learning and they had amazing meetings there, but as they had to leave Kirtland, they're then leaving their temple behind, leaving behind all of that hard work, and they come to Nauvoo, and this is where a lot of further doctrine was restored on what the purpose of temples was. And so they come to Nauvoo, and they're really, like, carving their entire city out of a swamp, um, which was probably quite an adventure for them. They're digging and all sorts of things, right? Just trying to make it habitable. It's like mosquito land. Everybody's sick.
Oh,
Um,
which,
and
by the way, these were not people who were experienced. I mean, they were a lot of
no,
farmers and
yeah.
people with very little education. They didn't have architectural degrees. They didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of the skills that were required of them to build up a city. it really goes to show that God can work with whatever you have. As long as you're willing, God will make
Yeah.
it work, which is amazing to me.
It's so true. And it's cool to see too how he used like the skills of the people that did come, right? Or he
Mhm,
prepared people to come that did have more experience eventually, right? But they all
mhm.
really were just working together to try to make it work. And then it's revealed to them that they need to build another temple. And I'm sure after having already been like driven from place to place, right? And especially after all of the persecution they experienced in Missouri, they probably were if I were them, I would be pretty skeptical. I would say, "Okay, this is a
Right?
really hard thing you're asking of us because we just built a temple, we just had to leave our
Mhm.
homes, and now we're barely getting established here." It took a lot of faith for them
Yeah,
to be able to actually follow through on this commandment, this thing that they were asked to
yeah.
do, this building of the temple.
I mean, living in extreme poverty, and then it must have felt like the temple was just kind of a luxury of, yeah, eventually,
Mhm.
obviously, we'd love to have a temple, but we're barely getting by eating, drinking, feeding our children. It's
Yeah,
very
it
much
was crazy. And it was a sacrifice for them too, and that's something that's really kind of cool is they didn't just like you said, they're coming from poverty, a lot of them didn't have a lot, but they did they were coming from different places where they had different skills, maybe they were good with, like, stone cutting or whatever
mm,
else it was, and so they would come and they would actually tithe their time, which I think is really cool. Usually the men would spend, like, 1 day out of every 10 just working on the temple, and so they're tithing their time and the women are thinking, "Okay, how can we help with this effort?" Something that's really cool. In Nauvoo, we talked a lot about how it was a temple city. It's a place where everybody, for the most part, was really focused on, "Let's build this temple. This is what God has asked us to do, and we're gonna do it together." And so as the men were tithing their time with whatever their skills were, the women kind of came together and they said, "How can we contribute to this? What can we
mhm.
do?" And they wanted to form like a little sewing society so that they could, sew shirts for the workmen, those sorts of things. And that's actually how the Relief Society was formed, which I think is really cool. This group of women that comes together and says, "How can we serve?" And they are able to use that to prepare for the temple to be built.
Yeah, that really brings up that the women came with a question, "What can we do to serve?" And
Yeah.
they kind of formed their own plan, presented it to Joseph Smith the prophet to pray about, and he came back with, "The Lord has something even better for you in
Mhm.
store." And
Yeah.
that's how the Relief Society was formed, but it wouldn't have started without the question that they were asking of how can we contribute. So cool.
Yeah, I love that, and they weren't even trying to think like, "Oh, how can we,
Mhm,
make a difference on the church for the rest of time or whatever," right? They're just,
mhm.
"What can we do to serve?" And then God, he did. He took them to something better. And there's a quote that I love that's in like the Daughters of My Kingdom or in My Kingdom book. And it just talks about how when they started this sewing society, it says they wanted to help prepare a temple for the people. Under the inspiration and guidance of a prophet and other priesthood leaders, they and their sisters ultimately helped prepare a people for the temple. And I just love kind of that principle, just like you said, that line upon line that God, He was giving them just enough. Start working on this temple, start this sewing society, do these little things. And then as they did that and as they gave up their time and their talents and everything that they had, God prepared them to be ready. And he prepared them to be able to go to the temple and receive that strength before they had to keep
Mhm.
keep moving forward from Nauvoo.
And even just objectively outside of the church, looking at how incredible these buildings are that have lasted through time,
Mhm.
that these saints, this was holy work, and they knew it, and they were not disappointed when it came to the dedication of the temple. Really good
It's
stuff happened,
true.
and that I think would have paid off a lot. No, I love all of this. This is great. I love that quote from Daughters of My Kingdom. It's been a while since I've read that one. I need to go back and do that one again. Was it Kirtland or was it Nafu that they had the vision of what it was going to look like?
I know that when they were building the Nauvoo temple, Joseph Smith, he had a vision of what it would look like, and it's actually kind of cool. One of the architects for the temple, his name is William Weeks. You might have heard of him. They
I
actually
think so, yeah.
right at the end of my mission, they had rebuilt his home. So he was an architect. And Joseph Smith said, okay, I saw this in a vision that the temple would have these like circle windows. William Weeks is like this, very educated. He knows, right? And he said,
Mhm.
that's actually not possible. Like nobody has ever done this before. And he's studied all sorts of architecture and things. And Joseph kind of put his foot down a little bit about it. And he said, no, I saw it in a vision that it would have these windows that are circles, and they made it happen. And I think that's really cool. Just another example of the Lord saying, here's a little bit, right? Here's this vision. This is what it will
Mhm.
look like. And then they kind of worked on that together and created what it would just look like from the outside, which is absolutely stunning.
So cool. It gives me little goosebumps, actually. I really love that. Yeah, they received a lot of experiences very similar to when the Temple of Solomon was built and how the Spirit was
Mhm.
poured out on people, and it looked like things were on fire because of how bright the Spirit was. That was very, very similar. And I think
Yeah.
just such a testament to the saints that what they had done had been accepted by the Lord. They really gave it their all. And the thing I just love about getting to talk to this, especially with you, is just how hopeful the temple is for people. It was hopeful for them then and very hopeful for us now. I think the story of how a lot of the doctrine was restored was through, well, I was debating calling this episode A Tale of Two Brothers because that's really kind of the way it started.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of religions believed that after you passed away, there was nothing you could do to help that person. They were done. They couldn't do the things in life. They don't really have a chance after death. I have this quote and this kind of goes back to how Joseph in his lifetime did not receive everything connected with the doctrine of redemption.
Mhm.
Brigham Young had taught the saints earlier that year, but he had left the key with those who understand how to obtain and teach to this great people all that is necessary for their salvation and exaltation into the celestial kingdom of God. That his people, like the Lord has led his people all along in this way and giving them here a little and there a little. And so as we talk about the restoration of temple doctrine and how some of these stories came to be, we can really see how
Uh-huh.
it's not that the doctrine of the temple changed. It changed. It was very much some of the practices revolving temple ceremonies, ordinances, like that has changed. And that still, to this day, is refined very carefully. Have you been to the temple since like 2 months ago? They changed up the endowment
Yeah.
film just a little bit, and I
Yeah.
love it.
I do. I love that kind of principle, just like you said, that line upon line. I feel like it's really cool to see when we ask God, whatever it
Mhm.
is in our lives, right? And we see that pattern here with the temples. God was giving them, like, this is what you're ready for. That's how I like to
Mhm.
think of it. Sometimes He has to wait for us to be ready to keep receiving that further wisdom. And He does that now,
Absolutely.
right? With the temple and with everything else. And He did it for these early members of the church as well.
I think very much people get discouraged when we try to receive revelation on a matter and aren't receiving an answer. It could be
Mhm.
the answer is you're not ready yet, or you're not asking the right question. And often it's not that the Lord is ignoring us, He's allowing us to get to what He's ready to reveal to us now. And that's always a process to
Yeah,
figure out.
it is. And I imagine for these members of the church, even just building the temple, they probably had questions, right? They
Yeah.
didn't know when they're first starting to build it, they didn't know why yet. And that's
Mm-mm.
something I think is fascinating is they're coming and they're saying, "All right, we're going to build the temple, but like we don't even completely understand what this purpose is. We just know that God told us to do it." And
Yeah.
I think that that takes so much faith. I think about times in my life when God has asked me to do something and I look at him and I say, "What? Why are you asking me to do this? I don't understand." But
Hmm.
they had so much faith and I love that.
Yeah, it's great that we can now look back and see this. So this was the purpose of this.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's just amazing. Have you ever seen Lamb of God by any chance?
it's so good.
I did a showing in the YSA award of that on Easter Sunday for anyone who didn't have like family to go back to, and just that song by Thomas, the "Sometime We'll Understand," gives
Yes.
me chills, and
That's
that's
been like
very
my
much.
motto for the
Oh,
last like month. I love it so much.
And Martha's song, all of it's so good. If you haven't ever seen it, listener, this is your chance. It's free on BYU.TV streaming. Just Do yourself a favor and just
It's
take a
so
look.
good. Good little
It's
Sunday activity.
oh,
It's
man.
amazing.
I
It's
listen to that
so good.
soundtrack. But yeah, it's very much sometimes with tearless eyes, we'll finally see what we couldn't understand here.
Yeah.
And so it's so good. Um, so yeah, I think I'll go ahead and kind of start a little bit with Joseph Smith's experience. We'll go into kind of the redemption of the dead if you're ready for that.
I am ready for the redemption of the
Amazing.
dead.
Oh, it's good. I'm gonna quote this is from Teachings of the President. I will always link everything in the description for deeper reading, but this is from the life of Joseph Smith. They've compiled a lot of his life and his teachings, and so this is in there. Early in the prophet Joseph Smith's ministry, he had an experience that would prepare him for the time when the doctrine of salvation for the dead would be revealed. In November 1823, Alvin Smith, the oldest child of Lucy Mack Smith and Joseph Smith Sr., suddenly became seriously ill and lay near death. Alvin was 25 years old, a strong and capable young man whose hard work contributed greatly to the family's financial stability. His mother described him as a youth of singular goodness of disposition, whose nobleness and generosity blessed all those all around him every hour of his existence, which I think it says it in here, but Joseph and Alvin had a really special relationship. And
Yeah.
I think this one was really hard. Knowing he was dying, Alvin called his brothers and sisters to him and spoke to each of them. To Joseph, who was almost 18 years old and had not yet received the gold plates, Alvin said, I want you to be a good boy and do everything that lies in your power to obtain the records. Be faithful in receiving instruction and keeping every commandment that is given you. Your brother Alvin must now leave you, but remember the example which he has set for you, and set a good example for the children that are younger than you. When Alvin died, a family asked the Presbyterian minister in Palmyra, New York, to officiate at his funeral. As Alvin had not been a member of the minister's congregation, the clergyman asserted in his sermon that Alvin could not be saved. William Smith, Joseph's younger brother, recalled the minister intimated very strongly that Alvin had gone to hell, for Alvin was not a church member, but he was a good boy, and my father did not like that, which I can't imagine losing your
Oh my
son. And
goodness, I
then,
can't even imagine.
and we hear stories of this where just well-meaning people that just don't know, and then to be told, oh, your child's doomed forever, your child has gone to hell and they're going to
Yeah.
suffer forever. And that is, I just can't fathom that anxiety you would feel as a parent, how awful that would be, on top of already grieving for them. Before this restored truth came to light, that's what people thought, and you can't be blamed for it. It's in the Bible, baptisms for the dead, but it's the Bible has changed a lot as
Mhm.
it's progressed. I've talked about that in an earlier episode, but in January 1836, many years after Alvin's death, Joseph Smith received a vision of the celestial kingdom in which he saw that Alvin, as well as his mother and father, would someday inherit that kingdom. Joseph marveled how it was that Alvin had obtained an inheritance in that kingdom, seeing that he had departed in this life before the Lord had set his hand to gather Israel the second time. The voice of the Lord then came to Joseph, declaring, all who have died without a knowledge of this gospel, who would have received it if they had been permitted to tarry, shall be heirs of the celestial kingdom of God. Also, all that die henceforth without a knowledge of it, who would have received it with all their hearts, shall be heirs of that kingdom. For I, the Lord, will judge all men according to their works, according to the desires of their hearts. And that feels like the beginning of hope. All that we've lost is not lost. That it makes sense. If Heavenly Father is our Father, a loving Father would give his children every chance to accept the gospel, to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. And just, again, the temple is the place of hope. It's where families are forged, and it's where people are able to do work for those who have passed away. It's really such a special ability to do that it's so easy to take for granted for me sometimes when I go,
Yeah.
oh, I'm just going to go do baptisms at the temple, and you don't think about some of these people have waited hundreds, thousands of years to receive these ordinances, and how happy they are that they get the chance to do that.
It's so true. And when did you say that he had that revelation again? I just was trying to remember.
No, you're good. It says January 1836.
Something I think it's just cool to think about that's so long after, after the beginning of the church has
Mm,
already been established for like 6 years. It just makes me think back to that principle of like that line upon line that he had already come so far from where he was when the church began, and then God is saying, "Look, like here's another principle that I'm giving to you. You're ready to know this." I'm sure it was
Mhm,
something that Joseph had probably been, like, thinking about or praying about for years since
mhm.
losing his brother, and just that timing, I think, is amazing that it
Is.
probably felt like a really long time for Joseph. It's felt like thousands of years for the people that we are are doing these baptisms for, but it was all in God's time, and I just think that's really cool.
I love that, thank you. Yeah, honestly, I think for the saints to hear this revelation would be both awe-inspiring and completely overwhelming
Yeah,
because
definitely.
now there's there's how many billions of people have lived on Earth? It's a lot. That's a big work. It's a big work to do. Even in the last conference with 17 million members, that
Uh-huh.
we have, that's such a tiny slice of humanity. This is a big work. And the wonderful thing is we do know that people still have their agency and can choose for themselves to choose Christ as their redeemer. So very much our purpose in life is to be able to have these ordinances performed. So it's an offering to those, and those people who have passed on can still choose whether they would like that to be done or to, have that ordinance be part of their life or not. So, as Elijah had taught, the hearts of the father turning to the children and the children's to their fathers. I mean, this
Yeah.
is, again, like I said, the forging of families right here. And it all comes together here in the temple. That the temple's not just a sacred place for worship, it's a place where eternity meets mortality, you know?
Mm. I love
Uh,
that. Eternity meets mortality.
thank
That's
you.
beautiful.
So
Put that on,
profound.
like, a
Thank you.
sticky note or something.
I can't take credit for that. I have a class where I teach temple appreciation, and we talk about some of the symbols that we encounter, that
Uh-huh.
we see in the temple. And one of the most common symbols that you'll see inside of temples are circles inside of squares. That's super
Huh.
common. Once you start looking for them, you won't be able to unsee them. So basically, circles symbolize eternity. There's no definite beginning, there's no end. It's one eternal round. And typically the square then, since it has definitive points on it, has a beginning and an end, that tends to represent mortality. So when you put the symbol that's on the temples of the circle and then the square inside of it, that symbolizes the temple where eternity and mortality meet. And
Wow. You just blew
yeah.
my mind.
Oh,
I
yay.
have never heard that before. That is so cool.
Yeah. I'll send you my presentation if you
I'm
want to
gonna
see. I
look
got
for
some good
that
ones in there.
now. That's really cool.
Yeah, you'll see them everywhere once you start looking.
Yes.
So yeah, this was a super exciting time for the saints to be able to participate in these ordinances, and I think very sweetly, very much in Peter, the apostle Peter, like faith, jumping out into the water and
Uh-huh.
just going for it. I think the saints were, we learned about we can do baptisms by immersion for our dead. Let's start gathering some names and let's just start baptisms. We'll do it in any body of water that's available, pretty much.
Yeah.
And there was not a lot of organization in that. Men were being baptized for women being baptized for men. There were no witnesses, and so it was very much at the beginning that sweet, deep enthusiasm that they had, but not the
Mhm.
further understanding. And it wasn't until the Lord revealed that records need to be faithfully kept. The house of the Lord, the temple, is often referred to as a house of order. As we will keep records here on earth, there will be records simultaneously kept in heaven. In a more perfect way, definitely.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure I've always said that the millennium will be a time to fix everything we did down here in the temple.
You're probably right about that.
I
Yeah,
am sure there are many people who've been baptized like 100 times by now. And they're like,
probably.
great, sealed to all sorts of
Mhm.
wrong people. But um, it's very much the temple ordinances are not just for those that we're doing them for, they're for us as we participate
Yeah,
in them to remind us of the blessings that we had when we received those ordinances. Now we need a recorder, someone to verify the record. Now we need witnesses to verify that this was done correctly. And the Lord would explain to the saints at the beginning of this that they could still continue to do baptisms in rivers or ponds or wherever, but at some point they would need to stop until a baptismal font was built into the temple, and then they
yeah.
could do the baptisms there and give them time to start collecting records. A bunch of saints started writing relatives of, send me all the information you know about great grandpa, great great grandpa, great 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 grandma, and give them time to collect these names. Anyway,
And
sorry, do you have any thoughts?
no, yeah, I do. I think it's really cool too, going along with that. Just like you said, like their enthusiasm was so, I bet, so just like pure and genuine, and they were so excited. And something that actually is really cool is when it was revealed, like, okay, we need to not put a pause, but a little bit, slow down a
Mhm.
little because we want to do this in the right way.
Mhm.
Um, and we talk actually a lot about that in Nauvoo in one of the homes that was restored pretty recently,
Mhm.
about how that revelation came to pass, that Joseph Smith actually was in hiding at this home to avoid being arrested. So it's kind of a perilous time, and
Ooh.
then he receives this revelation. He's like hiding. I'm trying to remember, either in the basement or in the attic. He's somewhere, right? Because people are like kind of after him. Not an easy moment for him, but he kind of uses it to receive this revelation, and he writes these letters to the saints, Doctrine and Covenants 127 and 128, where he says, okay, this is how we want it to be done. Like, yes, we can do these baptisms for the dead, but I love in Doctrine and Covenants 127 verse 4. I'm just gonna read it because I
Yeah,
think
go
it's
for it.
so cool to see kind of this perspective that he says, this is why we're doing this. It says, "And again, verily thus saith the Lord, let the work of my temple and all the works which I have appointed unto you be continued on and not cease. And let your diligence and your perseverance and patience and your works be redoubled. And ye shall in no wise lose your reward, saith the Lord of hosts. And if they persecute you, so persecuted they the prophets and righteous men that were before you. For all this there is a reward in heaven." He's just saying, let's do this, right? You're doing this and I am with you. And this is why I want you to keep doing these baptisms for the dead, but we need to have recorders. We need to have this be done in the proper way and in the temple. And so keep working on the temple, and it's going to be hard, but like you can do it. And if they persecute you, then you're in good company. You're working towards that reward in heaven. You're working towards being with your family for eternity.
Mm.
And I just love the Lord's words to the saints on that. Honestly, I think it's amazing.
I am so glad you shared that. Thank you so much. See, this is why I knew you'd be an amazing guest.
Oh, thanks.
It's so great. So yeah, the saints were able to do baptisms and confirmations, which would allow people to receive the gift of the Holy Ghost and to have that under proper priesthood authority and priesthood
Mhm.
power so that they could start utilizing the Spirit of the Lord in their life and to be set apart to do that. So yeah, baptisms, confirmations were huge. And a lot of religions believe in baptism. Many
Yeah.
religions participate in baptism. Something I'll probably mention in a later episode, but something I'm very particularly thankful for was the revelation that little children, before they reach an age of accountability, are saved by Christ and by His
Yeah.
mercy. I'm very thankful. A lot of people believe that children are born in sin because they're born mortal and therefore, took upon themselves the sin of Adam and Eve, however they want to put that.
Yeah.
But we know that until children are able to make the decisions for themselves, that the parents are responsible for raising them correctly and raising them in the ways of the Spirit. And then that children, if they die before that, that the Lord's taking care of that. Because honestly, I don't know how you could look in the face of a little infant and not know that that thing is straight from heaven and that thing is
Uh-huh.
pure as pure, hasn't made any mistakes yet.
So true.
And that's also, I think, a very hopeful thing as well. So, very much for those who died before the age of 8, that baptisms would not need to be performed for them. But there were later ordinances, we'll get to sealings, that children would be able to be sealed to their family for time and all eternity, which I don't know about you, but sealings, live sealings in particular, are my favorite types of
They are
any temple
beautiful.
ordinance.
Yeah.
Oh man. Anyone who gets the chance to see a couple being married in the temple, to be sealed together, or to see children being sealed to their parents, I'm going to get teary thinking about it. It's my favorite ordinance.
It is so
We're
amazing.
talking about baptisms.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
We're
Yeah.
getting way ahead. um, but yeah, no, absolutely. And then they had that font that was set apart and able for them to be used solely for the use of baptisms, to have the witness area, to have a recorder, and they were able to do all of these things to keep the order of that, which we still use in all the temples. That we now have an electronic system that you can just scan the barcode and it will show up that this ordinance has been performed for this person. So that way we're not trying to, do a bunch of baptisms for the same person. Hopefully.
Yeah. Most of the time we're avoiding those errors.
I remember, this is so stupid. We had like a last minute spiritual thought that if we were ever asked in seminary or church to give a spiritual thought, we would stand in front of the class and just be quiet for 1 minute. I would like check the clock and we'll time it. And everybody gets very uncomfortable. And then after you wait, you say, if you thought that minute was long, think how long your ancestors have been waiting for you to do baptisms for them or something like that.
That's incredible. That's so cool.
Just working in the temple recently, we had a name from the year like 983. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person has been waiting not quite 2,000 years. Math is not my strong suit, but a long time. And I always like doing the math when I see names to be like, oh, this person's waited 206 years and this person, and hopefully time passes by faster for people who have passed away. I would imagine.
Because that sounds like a really long time to wait.
It does. But anyway, thinking how exciting this is going to be for everybody. And so as we participate in these ordinances of the temple, we're not actually the savior for these people, but in a way we get to experience doing something for them that they can't do themselves. And we get to experience that feeling of we're able to help and we're able to serve. That is what was promised in the Bible, the gathering of Israel. That goes on both sides of the veil. That's not just here. It's not just now. It's gathering, which is so cool.
Which is really cool.
It is.
And it just keeps going.
I know, right? It's going to be the best. I'm so excited for getting to do all temple things. Do you have anything else you'd like to share about baptisms, confirmations, before we kind of switch gears a little bit here?
I don't think so. I think that's really it. I think it's amazing to see that progression of revelation. I love that you pointed that out at the beginning, because now everything that we talk about, I'm like, wow. Line upon line. It's incredible.
Line upon line. Straight up. Yeah. Hello, listener. Due to the wonderful nature of this episode and the length of the discussion, I'm going to go ahead. We're going to split the episode. We're going to end it here. And I hope you join us for part 2 of the episode. Have a celestial day.